In the morning of June 19th, we crossed the border between Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro. The passage is divided in two sections, Ham on the Bosnia and Herzegovina side and Stjepan Polje on the Montenegrin side. Between them, over the Drina River, there is a metal bridge with a wooden roadway, very similar to the destroyed one we found at the end of episode 7. An example of how long warfare leaves a mark is the fact that only in 2021 the mining was undertaken in two locations with an area of 11,000 and 4,000 square meters in the Ham-Stjepan Polje border area and 5,000 and 10,000 square meters in the Sutejska National Park. Local mayor pointed out that tourism is a strategic branch of the local community, so the authorities will continue to insist that priority should be given to demining locations near tourist attractions. It is suspected that there are still about 3.5 million square meters of land miles in the Foča municipality, and the clearance should not be completed until the end of 2030. From the border, we took the E762 road towards Plužina. After the first few kilometers, we came across an impressive bridge over the Piva River, which heralds a feast for the eyes in the form of amazing views. There are 56 numbered tunnels carved into the rocks on this stretch up to the bridge over Lake Piško. There is no lighting in them, and sometimes there are holes in the roadway, so you need to maintain concentration here, which can be difficult due to the constant dramatic changes in brightness when entering and exiting tunnels, to which the eyesight has to adapt, and the views outside. And there's a lot to enjoy here. The Piva Canyon, which is on the right when driving from the border into Montenegro, was flooded in 1975 when the Mratinje Dam and hydroelectric power plant were built. The road runs along the Piva River with an incredibly turquoise color, which it owes to the composition of the surrounding limestone rocks and the rolled rock walls surrounding it, climbing up to a height of 1,200 meters. The slopes are overgrown with percussion trees, thyme and rosemary bushes clinging to the rocks. After reaching the vicinity of the bridge over the lake, we start the driveway along the narrow serpentines of the R16 road, piercing through the rocks leading towards the Dormitor Massif. Practically at every turn you want to stop and admire the views. Fortunately, there are several viewpoints here, and we stop in one of them for a coffee break and a flight over the lake, which takes on different colors of blue and green depending on the time of the day. Piva Lake is the second largest lake in Montenegro and at the same time the largest artificial reservoir in the country. Its area is 12.5 square kilometers. It stretches over a length of 45 kilometers, and in some places it reaches a depth of 200 meters. Here and there you can find information that it is the largest reservoir of drinking water in the world, but I would treat it with a grain of salt. After leaving the vicinity of Lake Piva, the R16 road, also marked as P14, does not promise to be spectacular. However, it soon turns out that I'm very wrong in my judgment when after a few kilometers we reach the border of the Dormitor National Park. This approximately 50 kilometers route from Plužina to Žabljak should be a must during a visit to Montenegro. Dormitor means, loosely translated, mountains dripping with water. These are typical limestone mountains where karst phenomena can be found at every step. Caves, canyons, and various rock formations. In this massif, there are as many as 26 peaks exceeding 2.2 thousand meters above sea level, and 48 peaks rise over 2,000 meters. This road leads through the south-central Dormitor. Unfortunately, at that time we do not realize how close we are to the deepest canyon in Europe, the canyon of the Taura River. So our plan is to reach Žabljak, spend the night in the area and drive through the mountains towards the southeast. After several kilometers, we reached the beautiful striped mountain called Prutash, 2393 meters. Prutash got its name from the cliffs called Prutovi, which is the plural form of the word prut, which means twig or branch. Prutash simply means mountain of twigs. The magnificent post-glacial sculpture of the massif was created in the Pleistocene. The glacier has created sharp peaks, ridges, cauldrons, boulder-strewn river valleys, and numerous lakes. Forests cover only 8% of the park, and although it may not be so visible, it is a typical high mountain area. The village of Żabliak had no charm for me. From what I saw through the car windows, it is a typical tourist town from a post-communist bloc, without any architecture or atmosphere that would attract. Therefore, after passing it, we left the beaten track and decided to find a place to stay as soon as possible because heavy clouds were hanging in the sky and we could feel the rain was coming. We followed the trail south, heading for an area where several creeks were visible on the map. We didn't travel terribly far because we found the perfect place after about 3 kilometers from the town, in the charming bend of one of them. The bank of the stream did not allow direct descent into the water directly next to the car, but you could easily enter it a few meters away. The clouds that had been following us for the last several kilometers were thickening with every hour, and I knew that I would not avoid the rain, so I unfolded the awning and devoted myself to the contemplation of the changing colors of the passing day. It started raining around 8 p.m., but around 9 a.m. we were woken up by the thunderstorm. Heavy drops crashed against our car, drumming on the car body and awning, accompanied by thunders and lightnings. Kira didn't like thunderstorms, but she seemed to feel safe in our mobile home. She settled down in her seat, and only her pricking ears were betraying her anxiety. For me, this weather was bringing peace. I like sound of rain, even if it usually means harder conditions on the trails after all. But this stormy morning was pleasant to me, so I wanted to share this positive energy with Kira, and having laid down next to her, we spent the rest of the morning cuddling. It stopped raining around 10:30. After a leisurely breakfast, I set about breaking up the camp, which you have to admit was in a very charming place. Gentle hills covered with a thick green and copper carpet of grass broke the monotony of endless pastures. Żabliak, looming in the distance, is the highest town in southeastern Europe. It lies at an altitude of 1420 to 1500 meters above sea level, so despite the relatively flat terrain around, we were quite high. Żabliak supposedly owes its name to the extremely loud croaking frogs that like the nearby streams, but we were only accompanied by crickets in the evening, so I can't confirm whether the frogs are really so audible here. This town is considered a good starting point for the Durmito mountain range. But if I was to come back here, I would definitely choose the same place to camp again. Finally, around noon, we continued our journey. After the last 2 days, mostly spent in the car, I let Kira move a bit. In fact, I probably wanted her to get some exercise more than she did, because she was satisfied with lazy sniffing around the campsite, although she disappeared from my sight for several minutes while I was preparing breakfast early that day and went to see what was going on behind the nearest hill. However, walking is not the same as running when it comes to taking care of the shape, so having no other options, she started the day with a short run. The marked route led to the southeast. After passing the village of Dobry Nago, we entered the forest tracks. There were traces of a night downpour in the form of puddles on the trail, but the gravel surface was compact and overcoming them was not difficult.
We were driving in the area exactly between the R10 and R20 roads, following the azimuth rather than having the exact route. So soon the scenario from the previous days began to repeat itself. Some of the selected paths turned out to be dead ends, and it was necessary to correct the course.
I must admit that we started wandering that day quite early, at 1 p.m., that is only 1 hour after leaving the place of accommodation. The trail led us somewhere between the peaks of Mali and Wielki Kraljevac. Despite the visibility of the trail on the map, it was not passable, so we returned to the gravel we were riding earlier. We didn't get too far. After about 4 kilometers, we came across a makeshift barrier. I didn't really know why it was there. There was no sign indicating the privacy of the road, there were no entry signs, and finally, there were no buildings in the immediate vicinity, so I decided to drive this way. Just in case, I put the wire on exactly as it was when I got here. Another fenced road turned out to be private land, so of course I respected the property and was forced to take another detour. Farther dirt road looks to be frequented. Some buildings loom in the distance, so again, I'm not entirely sure if the road won't end there again, but since the maps show trails branching off from it and the road itself is marked on the map like other trails, I decided to continue. After a few hundred meters, we reach a place where I'm seriously wondering what to do next. The road ends in the homestead, and then you can't see anything resembling a hiking trail. But it is on the map, so we try. Once someone wrote to me why I call those trips off-road since I always drive on-road. Well, of course I don't want to argue with keyboard warriors, but I hope that this fragment will satisfy even them. Leaving the road far behind, we sank into the green carpet of endless pastures. From the bird's eye view, the area looked as if it was to be a walk on a perfectly trimmed lawn. In fact, the grasses hid a lot of stones and here and there smaller and larger boulders that you had to be damn careful of. In such terrain, it turns out that defenders' ground clearance, which seems to be very good, is often insufficient and visions of throwing portals are becoming alive again. And this vision becomes even stronger the farther you are from civilization. The last thing I would want to do is damage something important under the car, and as you can see in this example, it's not that hard to do it in such places. That's why it's better to let go out, check what is hidden in the grass, what the area looks like, and decide what to do next. Here, the best option was to go around the obstacle on the right side, and that's what I decided to do. Low gears engaged, 4x4 drive, and we were still losing traction moving on this wet grass. When you have such endless sea of grass in front of you, with waves in the form of surprises hiding just under the surface, potentially even immobilizing the car in such a place, it makes a person feel somehow a little self-conscious. Different thoughts come to mind. Is it worth pushing farther? And what if it gets even worse farther down the trail? How long will it last? What a trip! For several days everything is suddenly against, and so on. But of course, we keep going. The map shows a dirt road not that far away, so let's hope we'll make it slowly. Sending the drone to check what the area looks like, whether it is possible at all, or whether some unspecified surprises awaits us in the moment, I saw only endless grassy meadows. Thought that everything seems much more possible from the air than it turns out to be in reality, I tried to assess the best possible option to overcome this terrain. Therefore, as it turned out later, we reached something that according to the map was a gravel road but turned out to be an ordinary dirt road in a slightly different place than the one indicated by the arrow in the previous animation. Suddenly, after a few hundred meters in the vicinity of the village of Gomilia in the municipality of Žablják, if we can call these few poor, dilapidated houses that way, we came across a completely new church standing literally in the middle of nowhere. I must admit that I always approach the topic of erecting magnificent buildings of worship with great misunderstanding, and this church was undoubtedly such, surrounded by crumbling houses and general poverty. As if people wanted to buy into God's favor during their lifetime, not understanding that only the priests of a given religion really benefit from it, and that God should reward for a righteous life according to his principles rather than focus on how properly people emphasize his power. But what do I know? It has been the same for ages, and it will probably be the same. So treating this architectural curiosity as an excuse to take a break and move our bodies stiffened by tension and stress a bit, Kira and I took a short run up and down that hill. After returning to the car, I saw that the left rear mud flap was hanging on one side only. Fortunately, it didn't break off, only the screw holding it to the fender came loose. So for this type of repair, it was enough to use an ordinary multi-tool, and fortunately, there was no need to pull out decent tools. Digging through the mud packed in the inside was more of a problem than just screwing the mud flap. After a few minutes, the job was done and we were able to move on. We drive farther east, following more or less visible traces of something that used to go this way. Fortunately, the dirt road is in a good condition, and even the water-filled ruts that we encounter from time to time are not a special challenge. As I don't really know how deep they are, I try to stick to the ridges, but it is not always successful, and the car effectively drifts when the wheels fall into the grooves. I'm used to the fact that I always come across some surprising artifacts when I least expect it. For example, these cows here. I haven't passed any houses for the last few kilometers, and suddenly they're standing in the middle of the road. And so stubborn. Eventually, I managed to pass them somehow and go on. But again, after a dozen or so minutes, I came across what seemed to be the end of the road. I tried to follow the red line on the map. This is the route I have planned. But somehow I'm wandering this time, unable to find a passable trail. At this point, it seemed to me that I had lost my tracks again, but somehow I spotted something like a road on the right leading to this grove and decided to check it out. There were clearly traces of some car that had passed this way earlier, so I thought there was a chance that I could climb the hill that was in front of me. I have to admit that those roots winding around, like pulsating veins under the skin, made quite an impression. Slowly, meter by meter, we climbed higher and higher, until we reached again a kind of a road that seemed to say it will be easier now. You just need to orient yourself in the area and determine which way to go, and then just stick to this track. Well, unfortunately, it wasn't that simple. Here it was so steep and narrow that I did not risk going farther and was forced to return again. And again, wandering and moving along a trail that disappears every time. As if the road was playing with me and testing my attentiveness. In places, it was really difficult to determine whether we were still driving something that had previously been explored by some motor vehicles, or whether we were already driving through the forest rather cross-country, and after the next bend, we would encounter a wall in the form of trees or bushes. Undoubtedly, this time I did not choose the travel route. But all in all, the last few days are a big unknown when it comes to implementing assumptions generated in the privacy of your home, as they say colloquially, using finger on the map. The other saying is, paper will accept anything, and that's how it was here. The reality turned out to be something completely different from the lines on the map, based on which I planned this part of the route. If you are astute observers, you have probably noticed in the last graphic that I did not finally manage to drive the planned route by following the red line south. But why? Find out in the next episode.